we're just waiting for people that it's accepting people right now. So. I think you can start.
Oh, okay. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So we are excited to have this first MICCAI Student Board webinar on the panel discussion on the tricks and tips of MICCAI Review, Rebuttal, Challenge, and Workshop. So today we have very excited to invite our panelists to discuss those topics around MICCAI participation. So before I start, I would like to introduce the MICCAI Student Board. This MICCAI Student Board is initially since 2010, which is student lead volunteer organization that want to involve student participation in the MICCAI community. So we have this amazing board member since last year, and so that we can carry out those amazing activities in the MICCAI conference and throughout the year. So this year we have a new workshop called Emerge Workshop, hosted by the MICCAI Student Board. This is the first workshop we had in the MICCAI Society. This is a student lead research. The student can submit their ongoing work with the student be the first or last author. So this provides a student opportunity to share, discuss their research project and receive feedback and mentorship. So we have this paper submission deadline on June 24, and you can find more information on this website, MICCAI MSB github.io/emerge. So, and you can also find more information on our social media. So with this, we open this webinar. So today we have amazing panelists who have experience in the MICCAI Review, Rebuttal, Submission, Workshop, and Challenge. So this is a schedule. So we'll first meet our panelists, and then in the first 30 minutes, we'll talk about paper review and rebuttal, and followed by the Q&A. And then for the next session, we'll talk about workshop paper submission and participation. And the last 20 minutes, we'll talk about the challenge participation. So we'll wrap up each session with a Q&A, but we'll have a longer Q&A in the end. So with this, let's first meet our panelists. So we have amazing panelists here to participate and share their experience. So I will first introduce each of the panelists, and I ask the panelists to say a few words about, for example, the research problem and your experience in the MICCAI participation and MICCAI community. So I would like to, I'm very glad to introduce our first panelist, Professor Chen. Professor Chen is the assistant professor in the computer vision in the University of Sheffield. And she is ever chair of MICCAI this year, and she has won the best reviewer award previously, and she had experience in MICCAI review, rebuttal, and organizing the workshop and challenges. So welcome, Professor Chen. Would you like to talk a few words about your experience in the MICCAI?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Wina, for the introduction. So I think I've been with MICCAI for more than 5 or 6 years, and mainly I'm working on how to build trustworthy AI models so that the end users like clinicians and patients, they are happy to use AI models to improve the quality of healthcare. So for the second question about my past experience with MICCAI for the newcomers, I would like to say, because it depends on the stage, right? If you are just start with MICCAI, maybe it's better to first find some senior people who had already got some experience before to help you to either identify the research problem or help you to improve your technical writing skills. From my experience, I found it's very beneficial. At that time, I got a very good supervisors, Daniel and Wenjia. They helped me to discuss some ideas and also help me to improve my writings, yeah, etc.
Yeah, cool. It's great. Thanks for sharing your personal experience. Let's then we can meet the second panelist, MICCAI Woodland. She's a PhD student at Rice University, and she previously has won the Best Paper Award at MICCAI workshop. So welcome, MICCAI.
Thank you. In terms of what research problems interest me, so I research at a cancer center in their imaging physics department, where we are developing segmentation models for clinical use. But as we've deployed these segmentation models, we find that they fail on patients with underrepresented characteristics. So I came in as a computer science student to research how we can build in automated detection of these potential failure points. Because the second question is directed towards newcomers, I'll be talking about my workshop papers later on, but I wanted to say welcome. I think the experience that I would want to share is I am a computer scientist who lives in a medical physics world, and I realized a few years then that I wasn't as interested in some of the communities that everyone else in my lab is, because they were more medical physics than my computer science interests, and the papers that I saw that were interesting were coming out of MICCAI, but I didn't know anyone in MICCAI, no one in my lab. I don't know anyone who had published in MICCAI before. But I came in, I went to MICCAI last year, didn't know anyone, and people were just so welcoming, and I made so many friends. The student society had wonderful events. I love the sports, that it's just a very welcoming and wonderful community. And so I hope that you have a similar experience and that you enjoy being here. And that if you are a newcomer, it's totally possible, if you don't know anyone in the community, to still publish as part of it and become a part of it.
That's great. Yeah. I think those messages will be very helpful for the newcomer to have confidence in participants in the MICCAI community. That's great. Thank you, MICCAI. Our next panelist is Marwan Alberto. He's a PhD student at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and he has abundant experience in MICCAI participation, including winning 2 challenge victories, 1 challenge run-up, and 2 Best Paper Awards at the MICCAI workshop. So welcome, Marwan.
Thank you, Anna, for this nice presentation, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for joining us for today. So for the first question about the research problem that interests me the most, I would say I like working with imperfect annotations, certainly to make the life for radiologists easier when it comes for reading or annotating the datasets. And this domain actually span weekly supervised learning, self-supervised learning, and semi-supervised learning. Considering the MICCAI submission experience, I just have like 2 years of experience in MICCAI, and I would like to share with you, or for the newcomers, a rejection experience, I would say. So I got rejected last MICCAI from the main conference. However, I took the reviews seriously and the feedback and asked for remote collaboration to improve the technical writing with the help of my supervisors, as Professor Chen mentioned. And with the help of my supervisors, I managed to get the paper accepted in a workshop, winning the Best Paper Award. And then meeting up with the MICCAI community, and it was very nice with the student board activities and everything, and I actually enjoyed it. And thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for Marana for mentioning the rejection experience. Actually, it's kind of in the process of our research and the submission. And probably we can talk more later in the discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. So our next panelist is Dr. Mo Chen Xu. He's a research scientist in the endoscopic vision at Odin Vision. Previously, he got his PhD from the University of College London, and he has was a finalist for the MICCAI Young Scientist Award in 2022. Yeah, welcome, Dr. Xu.
Hello. Thanks for having me here. So yeah, and thanks for the introduction. So I think for the first question, during my PhD, I was really interested in label-efficient deep learning for medical imaging because it is very difficult thing to acquire the labels. But recently, my research interest has shifted towards more about data-centric deep learning. So how to use smart agent to do to use deep learning for medical imaging. And for the second question, so personally speaking, so most of my MICCAI submissions to the main conferences were actually rejected. But luckily, I got one MICCAI paper accepted in 2022, and luckily that one got named as finalist for the Young Scientist Award as well. I think the main difference between that submission and all of my other failed submissions is for that submission, we spend most of the time of writing on the submission, for instead of running experiments towards the last minute. So I think it is very important to put a lot of time into writing. I would say probably even more than what you put into doing experiments and so on. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for sharing how to improve the experience, especially in the writing. Probably we can talk more later, in the second session. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Xu. So our next panelist is Harry Anthony. He's a PhD student at University of Oxford, and he previously has won the Best Paper Award at the MICCAI workshop. So welcome, Harry.
So hello. I'd say my main research area is looking at out-of-distribution detection and uncertainty quantification for deep learning models for medical image analysis. So that's when we want to detect when an input for a model differs significantly from the training data, with the overall goal of improving the reliability of these models. My experience with MICCAI, I attended the conference last year in Vancouver, and that was the first main conference I attended as part of my PhD. I really enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed the community, and it inspired me to become part of the MICCAI Student Board. So right now I am the PR officer for the MICCAI Student Board, where I run the social media accounts. And I recommend anyone who's interested to look up the MICCAI Student Board, because there's a big community there. We have a Slack and all these social media accounts for networking. So I would definitely recommend that.
It's great. Thank you, Harry. And our final panelist is John Koffer. He's a PhD student at TU Darmstadt, and he previously won the MICCAI Young Scientist Award last year. So welcome, John.
Hi, thank you for the introduction, and also, of course, thank you for having me here to talk a bit about what I'm currently interested in. So basically, from the first moment of my PhD, I had a very clear general idea of what I wanted to do, and I was basically working with neural cellular automata, which is a rather new architecture. Not many people are using it right now. It's basically based on the older concept of cellular automata, just by replacing the update rule with a neural network. What's very interesting about it is a local neural network that works through iteration. So you increase the perceptive range of a cell by running it multiple times. And what's so interesting about it is that because it is run multiple times and because it is specific to a cell, you actually can get very efficient models. So what we have basically shown in MICCAI is that with only like 15,000 parameters, you can get about UNet performance, which is about 2 to 3 magnitudes bigger. And that's basically has since then been my whole area of research, especially because it's a very important step, in our opinion, into the democratization of medical AI, to get more lightweight alternatives to run on much more minimal hardware so that you don't have this huge overhead. Exactly. And in terms of my previous MICCAI submission experiences, so something, since we're also going to talk a lot about the rebuttals and everything, I think my favorite experience of last year's MICCAI was definitely when I got the reviews. And apart from being quite good, which was of course very nice, I had this one review which was about 1 full page long, and it was very in-depth, and it actually also had a lot of critique, but that was actually very nice to see, because I could really tell someone put a lot of effort into like thinking about my topic, gave me a lot of very constructive feedback. And I think that's also something to keep in mind as a reviewer yourself. While you will never hear from the author, or not really directly from them, it's very highly appreciated to get like a thought-through review. And also, of course, the conference, MICCAI, was my first bigger conference where I have been to. And that was also very interesting to see a lot of very interesting presentations. So that was really nice to talk to the community.
That's great. Thank you, John. So now we have all the panelists. We have met all the panelists. So we'll move to the next session on the paper review and rebuttal. So here I list those topics we can discuss. So I will stop sharing so the panelists can like talk freely. Yeah. So maybe the first question is about how do you conduct a research review, MICCAI review? I guess we're kind of in the process, and you have this area chair and who will lead the review. So maybe you can talk about your experience, how to be a good reviewer. I guess probably mention some of them. Maybe Professor Chen, can you start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think now, in a few days the review race will be started. So everyone invited reviewers will start reviewing the papers. And I was fortunate to become one of the outstanding reviewer in the last year MICCAI. And when I look back into my process about writing reviews, typically I will just first be open about the paper, even if this is not the field that I'm familiar with. So you may need to first to just look through the paper, try to understand it first without judgment. That means you might need to educate yourself into the field by looking into either some literature review about this field, if this is something that you're not familiar with. If this is something you're already familiar with, then you need to think about a few questions, whether this is a MIC paper, whether this is a CHI paper, and whether this paper is a kind of like application-driven or it's more like a methodology studies. So I think the reviewers should be clear about the guidelines about reviewing, right? So different types of papers, you will have different criteria to think about. So for example, if this is a methodology study, then you need to think about whether the methodology behind is really novel and whether the experiment design really supports the claim of the novelty, whether there is a missing ablation study. So it's kind of like build some critical thinking into the reviewing process. And when you already got the answers for these questions, you can start writing. And one of the points I should mention is that please make sure that the review is not only for the authors, but also for the AC area chair. So you need to be structured and clear. For me, I will make it like 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph will be like a summary. It's not only just a summary of the paper, but also a brief summary of the advantage and disadvantage. So it's basically 3 sentences. And then you can break down into the major advantages or the pros of the paper and the cons of the paper, and also give some constructive comments, whether there is a typo or whether you feel like the figure needs to get to improved. Yeah, so that's basically about my reviewing process for reference.
Thanks, Professor Chen. Would anyone else want to share the review process?
I mean, I can add a few thoughts to that. So first of all, I highly agree. It's very important to be open about the paper. I mean, people like the authors have put a lot of thought of it, of course, into it, and you need to consider that, and they might have different ideas of it than you do. So I think something that I always like to do is just on top of just having, of course, first a summary and going through the main advantages, is also to just have a predefined number of advantages and disadvantages, just to force myself to really look for the good and for the bad, even if it's a paper which I might not fully agree with. It makes me like think a bit more deeply about what has been done. And yeah, that's usually how I like to go along with it.
Thanks. Anyone would like to add more thoughts on this review, or your personal experience? Mo Chen, I'm not sure if you're also in the finalist of the Best Paper Award, so maybe can share a few words.
Yeah, I didn't review my own paper, so I wouldn't know the thoughts of the reviewers of my paper when they selected my paper. But like personally for me, because I've been reviewing for MICCAI papers for a couple of years now. So every time when I see a paper, I try to extract like the thought process of the paper, like to say how much thinking the authors put into the paper. But obviously there are also some very engineering heavy papers. And for those kind of papers, it's very difficult for general reviewers to switch the mind, to switch the mentality, because people would be thinking like, oh, this is not novel. So yeah, it is. So I think like the first thing would be like grouping the paper first, so you can have different criterions when you review the papers. So and when I have the badge of the papers, what I do is I first just accept all of them, and then I start to find the things like that might be I don't know, bad in terms of the impact, in terms of methodology, novelty, or anything. And then every time when you find something, you put the negative points, and until eventually, like, you might have more disadvantages than the advantages, that you might have to vote, like reject for that paper. So things like that. But also notice like all different reviews have very, very different tastes. It's very difficult to make sure like your paper goes to the reviews with the same taste as you. I don't think I have a good method to do that. So yeah, that's a bit of like luck.
Is there anyone else who want to add more on like your review experience you want to share? If not, we can move to the next topic on the rebuttal, which I guess probably next month we will have this rebuttal period. Especially want to know from the panelists, what's the other do and don'ts for the rebuttal, especially in the limited time and you have the limited space to put your rebuttal in the text. Yeah, so who would like to start?
I can start with. I think I was lucky. All of my first author papers got accepted either with rebuttal or not. So based on my past successful experiences, I would first go through all the reviewers' comments and categorize them, not only just looking into the bad things, but also the good things, like what's the strength of the paper they acknowledged, and what is the major criticism I received, and maybe some constructive comments that are minor. And once you got these three categories of them, you can start to think about dump your thoughts about how to respond to it. So it just quickly dump your thoughts. You don't have to spend time rephrasing or structuring your words. And then you can discuss with your co-authors to see whether there are some comments that are not that constructive, or it's just based on some misunderstanding, or it's just something that you need to point out in the rebuttal. So this is one thing I feel like you need to spend most of the time on it. And once you group these criticisms, you need to figure out what is the most important ones to start with. So the rebuttal should be starting with the most important ones to the less important ones. And usually the first paragraph will be a summary of thank you words, okay? Because the reviewer really spend their time on it. So you need to spend time to appreciate their time and also their constructive comments. And it's also a chance for you to telling the AC what is your strength of your paper, saying like we thank R1, R2 for acknowledging the novelty, etc. And when you're trying to dealing with some criticisms, I found there are two secret tricks. One is you can use the other reviewers' positive comments to make it as a weapon to the other comments if they are conflict. So this is one trick. The other one is if people charge you about the motivation and there is some evidence from other published papers, you can use that. So this is basically two tricks. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember you also like suggest like doing review or rebuttal is not only like between reviewer and author, but also for the AC.
Yeah.
To touch. Yeah.
Yeah.
So an important thing to keep in mind. Yeah. Anyone else want to add?
Yeah, I could also add something. So sometimes it could also help if you like list the strands of what the reviews think, even when sometimes some of them have negative points, but like it's always nice to first mention like the strengths, like and that actually reinforce the strengths to the AC and also other reviews. Yeah, that's one tip.
Yeah, so don't forget to mention your strengths in the beginning to have a positive impression. That's a good suggestion. So any other tips?
I mean, maybe one more thing is maybe to also consider how realistic it is to fulfill everything that the reviewer suggested. There might be something like a reviewer suggesting to have a second data set, which might just not be feasible in a week, depending on the method you have and the setup. And then you just need to basically explain yourself very thoroughly why you chose the experiments the way you did. And don't try to reach the impossible and just better focus on the rest to really focus your effort and then not forget something else that might be important.
So it relates to how you frame, how you can make your promise, like don't be overestimate your promise.
Yeah, I mean, you also have a very limited amount of time, so you need to spend it wisely. You might also have other tasks you need to do in that week, so in the end, you can't fulfill everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you. So one thing, the rebuttal of MICCAI is very different for those rebuttal in CVPR or CLEAR or ICML, where you have interactive rebuttal phases and you can add some experience. But MICCAI, from the guideline, you will find that it basically suggests you not to over-promise you will add in additional experiments. One is because the page limit. The other is it will make AC feel like maybe their experimental result is not substantial. That's why you want to add more experiments, right? So it will becomes making it like a weakness of one of their paper. So normally I would not suggest people to add experiments rather than highlighting whether this something has already been covered in your paper already, but the reviewer failed to find it. Yeah.
Yeah, I also remember like previously we talked about like the rejection experience, which can also lead to some other results when you incorporate the reviewers' comments seriously, treat those like, objections or like negative opinions. So it should not be purely regarded as a bad thing in the rebuttal. Yeah, sometimes it can improve your paper, your work. And, any other thoughts? Previously, I also remember we mentioned about the paper writing. Like I remember John who mentioned you spend more time on the writing or rather than doing experiments. So maybe we can also talk about like paper writing versus actually carrying out the experiments.
Oh yeah, it was actually me who mentioned
sorry,
that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say like if you have 1 day left towards the deadline and your experiments haven't finished, I would stop the experiments, although it might be a very painful decision to make. And so instead of just focus on the writing to convey the message out. And I think that is like extremely important because MICCAI is very short. If you can't like have the punchline out in the beginning of the paper, the reviewers might miss it, and it will have a lot of misunderstandings, and you can't really change their opinions even during the rebuttal. And also, I think like for something to add for the rebuttal, similar to what John mentioned about how realistic it is. So also, if some of the comments are ridiculous, like they're asking for like 2 data sets or something, you can even ignore them because like it's obviously they're trying to give you a really difficult time on purpose. And also if you encounter, although most of times you have like nice reviews, and as one of the question raised, if you have like really negative reviews, you can also ignore them and just raise them to the area chair. And the area chair normally would respond to this kind of concerns and will just ignore the reviews of those kind of comments. So this won't actually affect the final decision. Like, yeah.
Yeah, so you can actually, because we have limited space, so you can actually ignore some of the minor comments, right, in the rebuttal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Sorry, I have something to say about the paper writing. I think it's very important to have internal reviewing process with a pool of collaborators, either from, it's better to have like from different levels, from your peer students or from your colleagues, postdocs, and maybe your supervisors, because different people, they will have different viewpoints and the language can be misleading. So you need to double check if the message you convey is clear to everyone. So I think it's better, like Morten said, it's better to have some days left before the submission to ensure you got sufficient internal reviewing process to refine your manuscripts.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe show your work to your lab mates, to like your supervisor or even to your friends to see if they can understand those language.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess probably you can plan ahead to plan a few more days before the deadline to refine your writing, your message you want to deliver. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely highly agree with that. Like in our group, usually a week before the actual deadline, we send it out to our colleagues to just get a bit more feedback. And it really helps a lot, especially with the writing, things that are unclear. I mean, you can't really do that much in terms of experiments anymore, but at least also it forces you to have an early version. So basically that you have more time for fine tuning everything. And that gives the whole paper, makes the whole paper a lot more a finished product in the end, where really the writing is clear, the motivation is clear, and also you need to put some effort into the figures to really get the message across.
It's really great suggestion. Thank you, John. I'm wondering if the audience has any questions on the paper review, writing, rebuttal. Feel free to put a question in the
I
chat.
think that there are several questions in the chat, and we can
Okay.
take them.
Yeah.
Maybe we can go first one with the fact that although Moshe mentioned on this briefly that even though MICCAI usually has some of the nicest reviewers, how do you deal with toxic or condescending review comments? So would someone like to take that? Maybe John, you can answer.
I mean, I can give my thoughts. I was not very successful so far. I mean, I try to still understand where they're coming from and give my point of view of the whole story. But of course, it's a bit difficult depending on how much they disagree with the motivation you're giving. So there have been points where the reviewers really didn't agree with the experiments we made and similar things, and then it's very hard to argue with them. I think it's important to not really start a big discussion with them, just to really objectively explain why you did things how you did, and then in the end see if they agree with you.
I think that's fair and right enough that sometimes there might be disagreement with what is being written by the author, but there is definitely a nicer way to handle it and try to put your point forward. I guess someone from the attendees have also raised their hand, so maybe we can take one question from directly from the audience. Rabi, do you have a question? Your mic is muted if you are trying to speak. I think there is some issue with this. Maybe we can move ahead with the next question. So there's also a question from the audience, which is about how is a methodological paper different from an application-based paper? So, Chen, probably you'd like to answer that.
Yeah, so if you check the guidelines of either AC or reviewers, you will find that the accessing criteria for a methodology paper is very different from the one for a clinician paper, application paper. And also, if this is a MICCAI paper or whether this is a MICCAI paper, they are quite different. So for the methodology ones, mainly we will be very interested in to see how novel it is. So it's important that you highlight it in your paper and you have sufficient experiment to prove that. Maybe it is just of proof of concept, but you needed to do it. For the application, it's more about like applying existing technology, but to a new problem, or maybe it's but of very great clinical value paper. So then we will look into how what's the promising aspect of it for like how much is the value of it. Yeah, but you can find more details in the MICCAI website guidelines about what's the some specific assessment guidelines there.
Thank you. I think that's very true. I guess there's one last question regarding the rebuttal, which is from the audience, that should we answer all the reviewer comment in the rebuttal? So, Moshe, would you like to answer to that?
Yeah, sure. So the answer is like no. So pick up like the most important, especially the subjective questions, like something misunderstood, and answer those. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Rina, would you like to take it forward?
Yes. So I think if we have no more questions, we can wrap up this session and move to the next topic on the MICCAI workshop participation and submission. So I have a few questions. Maybe I can share my screen. Yeah. So probably we can cover what's the difference between the main conference and workshop, and what's the award-winning workshop paper look like, because we have several best paper awardee here. And so how did your workshop paper end up with and then maybe if you can change one thing about the MICCAI workshop submission, what that would be. So maybe you can start from the first question. So maybe for the newcomer, what's the difference between MICCAI main conference and the workshop submissions? Just stop sharing.
Maybe I can start with, because I'm one of the organizer of the workshop in MICCAI. I guess workshop papers are more like a topic driven small conference. You can think about it like that. It's like a mini session, but you will go through similar process as MICCAI main conference. You will get at least 2 reviewers to give you some feedbacks, but normally there is no rebuttal. So usually we got the paper, we are assigned to reviewers to read the paper, give us some feedbacks, and the workshop organizer will be acting as AC or the mentor reviewer to decide whether to accept these papers or not. And usually the accepted risk can be low or high, depending on how many submissions we receive each year. But normally the acceptance risk will be higher than the main conference, which means that even you got rejected by the MICCAI main conference, maybe you can still get accepted by a workshop paper. But then at the workshop, it provides you nice networking opportunities for people who are working on the similar topics as you. So it's a good networking place. And there is another type of workshop paper coming from challenges. Maybe you will discuss in the next session that also the challenge paper can also be as a MICCAI workshop paper, whereas the main conference, basically they are just focusing on whether this is a technical novelty paper or whether this is an application-driven paper. Yeah.
So it's more like a sub community for
Yeah.
top research topics. Okay.
Maybe I can add to that.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing to note with workshops is the paper format is not always the same as the main conference paper format. So an example would be the workshop MMMI typically accepts papers up to 12 pages, whereas I believe the main conference is only up to 8 pages. So I would definitely double check what the format for each workshop is before applying, just to make sure that your paper is going to meet these criteria.
Thank you, Anthony. Also, in order to continue with this, how do you decide, which would be a relevant question in this similar line, that how do you decide that whether this paper should make it up to the conference, main conference, or to the workshop? Marwan, maybe you can answer that, since you have quite a bit of experience with it.
Definitely. So for me, like, for example, if the topic is much more narrowed or very specific, like federated learning, for example, my paper that was rejected in MICCAI was about federated learning, and most of the reviewers were not confident in the reviews, even though they give a lot of constructive feedback that helped me improve the paper. But it actually matters if your topic is very narrow and have its own audience, because most of the people may not be interested about a single topic. So choosing between a workshop paper or a main conference paper depends heavily on whether your paper can be listened by the right people in the right time, I would say. So also one of the papers in 2022, I remember, was working with domain adaptation and representation transfer. And we started working on this paper actually after the deadline for MICCAI. So we aimed for a workshop rather than the main conference. And definitely we chose the workshop that like matched the most with the paper topic. And also, I would like to add on what Professor Chen and Harry mentioned, that when you are formatting the writing for your workshop paper, it differs than the main conference in that you know the experience or the background of the reviewers and the audience that are going to be reading your paper. So sometimes it makes it easier for you to use some terminologies in contrast to the main paper submission, where you have to make everything explicit for the viewers. And thank you.
Thank you. And just to continue on this same line, what do you think makes an award-winning paper? Since you have quite a bit of experience with this as well, so it would be great to hear from you. What do you think adds on to this?
So from my own experience, I would definitely say that a good balance between the clinical impact as well as the novelty of the paper is a must, I would say, if you are aiming for best paper award, because you are targeting MICCAI now. So you have to have like a nice, impactful or clinically impactful paper. And at the same time, when you are considering the novelty, sometimes as an author, you can know if this paper can make it through or not based on your reading now. Research is incremental, so novelty can be considered as an incremental research. Also, novelty can come as an application. However, when it's an award-winning paper, I consider that you are doing something that maybe does not come to someone's mind, and people can get impressed by how did you approach this problem and how creative you are in the solution, not something that can be easily inferred based on your title or your abstract as easy. So definitely, I would say creative and simple methods can make it to the award-winning papers. And that's based on my experience so far.
Right, very rightly said. Anthony, would you like to add something, or Mikhail?
Sure, I can add something. So I got the Best Paper Award for the workshop Unsure, which is based on uncertainty modeling. And that matched really well with my research topic of outer distribution. So my first advice would be to do your research on what these different workshops are. I think there's over 30 MICCAI workshops, and they all have very specific focuses. So I'd definitely do your research. And then I would do a good literature review of previous submissions to these workshops, just to see where your research is in the landscape, and what kind of work are you building upon, what kind of impact will your work have. So I'd say, yeah, definitely do a good literature review before writing a paper.
I would just reiterate what's already been said. For my best, it was a best spotlight paper. I put the paper together in like a month before. It was just an idea that I had that was like, okay, I'm interested in this, but I've never been able to work on it. Let me put it together. And it's the most simple paper I have ever written, but it was very, nobody had ever thought about that before. And so it generated a lot of excitement. And so I do agree with what's been said. People want to understand the paper. People want it simple. People want something that's going to drive impact, something that they haven't really seen before.
Thank you. That's really exciting to know, and that shows how rich the panel is. All the award winners' paper from the main conference and from the workshop shared their experience regarding the fact. So let's move on to the next question, which is about where did your workshop paper ended up with once MICCAI workshop was done? Did it end up in a conference or a journal submission? Did you work on the extension? If you could share a bit about your experience regarding that. So
Can we start on this one?
let's get started. Yes.
Thank you. I've had two experiences with this that I want to share because I feel like I made some mistakes. So I don't want anyone else to make the same mistakes. I love the MICCAI workshops. I think that they produce very great papers, but workshops aren't always seen as prestigious as conferences and journals in other places. And so my very first workshop, I submitted a very fleshed out, great paper, and it was accepted, and I was excited about it. And then afterwards, I learned that it wasn't acceptable for my PhD committee to be published in a workshop. I needed to then go and put it in a conference in a journal. But I had a really hard time publishing an expansion because it was already very fleshed out. It was hard to add to it. So I ended up having to scrap the entire paper and take an idea from it and write a new paper to get that published as part of my degree. And so I think it's important to realize what your expectations are, what you're trying to do, and what communities you're in, because my community doesn't really know much about what MICCAI workshops are. They just know about workshops at other places, which are not as fleshed out as MICCAI papers. So the second time around, I purposely left a little bit of room in my paper to expand it. And now it's a much better expanded paper that's under review at a journal that I'm excited about. So it is, if you do want to expand it, if that's something that you need, it's important to think about that before you submit to the workshop.
That's very enlightening. Thank you. Would someone else like to add to this?
Yes, I can go on on MICCAI 2022, we had a best paper award at DART. We were invited actually for extension by waiving the APC and the processing charge. However, we were very busy doing the master thesis because it was part of our master's program. So we have not had the time to extend it. But last year, I participated also in MICCAI and got the best paper in DCAF, Workshop for Federated Learning. And it ended up by being a chapter in a book that is published by Elsevier with editor Chao Li, and is currently in progress. So actually, workshop papers can get extended either to chapters or journals. And apart from such invitations, I consider that you participating in a workshop will have a code base that will help you in expediting your research further and having this nice table already implemented in your code base. So whether or not it ended up in an extension, you still have the code to, I would say, use it or reuse it for another research. So that's based on my experience.
Thank you. Anyone else? Harry, would you like to add?
Yeah, so I'm currently in the process of extending my MICCAI submission for the workshop, and hopefully going to extend it to a journal paper. However, this is still ongoing, so it's not there yet. I think there's definitely, if it's interesting research, there's always opportunities to extend the research, and you can, push it to a journal or any other, like a conference paper. There's lots of opportunities.
Perfect. All right, let's move on to the last question of this session. And it's a very open-ended, and I like this question a lot, which is, if you could change one thing about the MICCAI or workshop submission, what would you, regarding the process, what would it be? So let's see, maybe Professor Chen, since you're from the organizing side, sometimes you have a better idea.
I think this is a very hard question. So I needed to spend some time to think about it. I would like to say that actually I think current MICCAI organization is somehow very good. One thing I like it is that you can find a list of accepted papers online with the rebuttal process, how the authors respond to the reviewers' points, and that you can use that as learning resources when you start drafting your response. So this is one thing I found quite useful. Well, there is also open review like ICML and iClear, but you will not find the very kind of like structured way, because the rebuttal style is very different from MICCAI. MICCAI is like you are trying to merge on reviewers' comments, trying to summarizing and put them in a very small piece of work. It's only like 4,000 characters. So you need to really spend time off to make it more concise. So I think currently I do not have very specific suggestions to MICCAI. I think I really like MICCAI. That's why I publish my papers like 4 or 5 in MICCAI. So yeah, but if anyone else has some comments, I'm very happy to hear, and maybe I can have some inspirations.
Thank you.
Like, I think
yes,
if there's
Marshall,
one
please.
thing can be changed, I wish they could change the template to make it longer, because it's extremely difficult to squeeze anything into like 8 pages with that kind of margin. I think that should be seriously considered for changing the template. But I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting suggestion, and definitely something that could be looked into. Anyone else? Marwan, Harry, Mikko, or John?
I'm just laughing because that's what I was gonna say. My MICCAI submission this year, I had one word in a figure heading that if I added it in, the sentence was grammatically correct, but it pushed it to 9 pages. And if I took it out, it was 8 pages. And it was this whole stress thing in my brain. Do I leave it grammatically correct or do I take out the word? That I'm just laughing because that's what I would have said too.
Yeah, definitely makes it interesting, and I have had similar experiences regarding this. Well, thank you all for the interesting insights, and let's see, Vienna, is there any question from the audience?
Oh yeah, we have our audience a question from Abhishek. Can you discuss more about the novelty of the paper, as it is kind of subjective and different for everyone? So how to evaluate the novelty of the paper before submission? What process do you go through? I remember MICCAI and we talk about you just win the best paper award because of the novelty and simplicity and this idea someone never think about. So how do you judge the novelty, and how do you come up with those ideas?
Personally, from my experience, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say that you can tell, man, I don't know how to say this, but the papers that weren't very novel that I've written, I've had a hard time coming up with novelty, whereas the ones that were novel, there was no question about what the novelty of my paper was. And so I think it really helps to, from the very beginning, think about what is the overall field, what's something that's left open that no one has ever done before, no one has ever tried.
Yeah, so maybe you can look at it, require you to know more about the whole field and identify some spots of like someone has never explored previously, I guess. Yeah. But I guess for the reviewer, it's hard to identify the novelty for AC. So I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on this as a reviewer on AC?
So for me, I think like novelty comes in a lot of aspects, as mentioned previously. Research is incremental, so reviewers have to know that incremental research can be considered novelty, yet not that impactful, but yet it's novel. Also, applications, if you use a model for an application which is clinically impactful and have not been done before, this should be considered as novelty, yet not as impactful, but it should be considered as novelty. Because I believe that most of the reviewers nowadays are looking for the award-winning papers. So they base on their acceptance and rejection if this paper is an award-winning or not. So yeah, definitely novelty comes in different aspects. And for sure, like you're more experienced than me in this. But yeah, you can assess the novelty based on your literature review and for sure your supervisor. They have been through a lot and their insights are much more valuable.
Yeah, I would also, I agree with that. I think something maybe also to consider in terms of novelty is not only did you do something different, but does it also have very different results? Like if you, for example, have an extrapolation study and you evaluate, for example, a different phenomenon. We had, for example, in one publication, we showed that we had scale invariance in our method. That's something that wasn't really present before. So that I would say it definitely shows some novelty in terms of the method because it just has some new feature that hasn't been there before. And I think something like that definitely, like just having some experiments that really show a use case that opens up with the method you presented, be it like a loss function, a new methodology, or just a new aspect to it. But I would also agree that I think, I mean, in general, I would say most reviews I do, it's never really a problem of the novelty. There's always some novelty, otherwise people wouldn't submit it. I think it's more like to communicate that novelty correctly and also to do the evaluation properly to actually get it through. And I mean, I would also say, I think there's maybe too much focus on this whole state-of-the-art aspect. I mean, it's very easy to like always check, is it state-of-the-art or is there a better method? And then you just ignore very interesting new approaches just because they are 3 years behind in research or something like that. I think that's something very important to consider also in the review process.
Yeah, like one thing like I would like to add is probably I think like when we talk about novelty, like most of reviews would ask for architectural novelty. Like, is there anything about the model itself? If there's anything that is novel, like everything else is not novel. So it is, I would say like if you raise a new research question, that is novelty for sure. And if your solution is existing model, but you provide like new insights, that's also novelty. But if you change your model architecture from like 3 layers to 6 layers, it is novelty, but it will have like much less chance to get accepted. And maybe a new way to deal with data or whatever. So basically there are like all different aspects about novelties. So I think I would say probably not just to focus on like the architecture novelty.
But I think just for like having a better chance of being accepted, it's definitely beneficial to have at least some minor methodological improvement. In some sense, just because reviewers will be much more forgiving for other things if you have that. If you really only show a new use case that's very interesting and still very novel and impactful, they might just say it's a new use case and there's not really any novelty included, even though it should still be accepted.
So I guess probably you can also help the authors to defend their novelty, not just from method, like from the evaluation, the application point, or some novelty in helping solve the real world problem. Yeah. Okay. So I think we have another question. Can you please provide several necessary but easy overlooked points in your rebuttal or your imperfection experience on rebuttal? Maybe something you feel kind of regretted, you want to improve next time in the rebuttal process.
Sorry, was the question regarding me?
Oh, the question is about rebuttal. Is there anything kind of people easily overlooked in the rebuttal, or some imperfect rebuttal experience you want to improve?
In terms of the author's perspective or in terms of the reviewer's perspective?
I think it's on the author's perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the points from before definitely still stand, really to put the right focus. Don't get lost in minor details that are just not very important. Just really focus on the main aspects, really try to identify for each reviewer what is the main aspects that they will reject your paper for. And if you can solve that, you might already have a much better chance of getting still through.
Yeah, one thing I want to add, also I answered it in one of the questions posted in the Q&A, is that people asking whether they could mention some additional results that has not been added in the manuscript or supplemental material in the rebuttal. The answer is no. So if you check this year's MICCAI guideline, you will find that if you're adding additional results, it will trigger automatic reject. So you need to avoid adding more results in your rebuttal. You can only try to convince the reviewers that you already done something in the paper, try to make it informative and be polite. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the
Okay.
MICCAI's official guidance for the reviewer to check.
I think that's a really good idea that while going through the rebuttal phase and once you receive the reviews, make sure that you rebut according to the guideline that is already provided on MICCAI's website. And in most of the case, it's pretty clear and addresses the question. It's great that we have so many questions from the audience, but unfortunately, because of the time restriction, we'll have to proceed to the last session. And if there is more time remaining, we can continue with the question. So let's move on to session 4, which is regarding MICCAI challenge participation. Thank you for sharing the screen, Mia. So there are 4 questions. The first one being, what is your motivation and incentive to choose a problem and participate in a MICCAI challenge? What's the process and submission for the challenge? How do you work? Usually alone or teaming up with a group of people? And then how do you manage this this collaboration with your teammate? And I guess that's general question, in fact, for the authorship as well. Like how do you work together? Maybe if someone can share their insights. And lastly, if you could change one thing about the challenge process, what would it be? Also, if there was an enjoyable moment regarding this. So I guess, Marwan, we could get started with you because you are the one who has quite a bit of experience in this regard, working with MICCAI challenges and winning them. So what do you think was your main motivation and incentive to work on a challenge? And just to give a brief background, working on challenge is slightly different than submitting a workshop or a MICCAI full paper, because here you're working with actual results where you're trying to compete with several researchers around the world to solve a very hard problem, which is not only ending into a publication, but actually solving some real clinical problem.
So yeah, thank you. So about the motivation for choosing a challenge, because I don't have enough experience, I would say in the in general, I'm just first year PhD student. So during my master's, to choose a challenge, I was not thinking much about the task, if I have experience with the task or not, because I was basically on the learning process. So I usually follow an ABC approach if I choose a challenge that is basically access to resources and data, baseline and matrix code, as well as the challenge task. So for the first one, which is access to resources and data, you have to screen the challenges to make sure that you have the necessary resources for participating and hopefully winning the challenge. For instance, don't go for a challenge that is tackling a large foundation models with 1 tera gigabyte and your only resources is Google Colab. You should think twice before going into such challenges, although it's feasible by doing some tips and tricks, I would say mixed precision and alternating your training. I remember in 2020, when I was here in Egypt, I'm still now in Egypt, but when I was in Egypt as a bachelor, I participated in a challenge in a generic computer vision task. And 1 epoch over the dataset took 9 hours on Colab. So it definitely took me 1 month to train 30 epochs, alternating between Colab and Kaggle, the open platforms. And I was glad to win not win, but actually I went for a runner-up this year. So it's nice to consider the access to resources, but yet it's not an excuse for choosing or participating in a challenge. You can make it work. The second aspect that I consider is the B, which is the baseline and matrix code. If the organizers have a baseline already there, it makes your life easier. So you only need to take the baseline and you only have to submit it, and you have a free ranking over the challenge without even doing anything. So having the baseline and matrix can actually give you an edge to choose or participate in a challenge. 3 out of the 5 challenges that I participated in were sharing their baseline, and it makes it easier for me to join. The metrics are a very nice plus if the challenge organizers are releasing them publicly, because participants can actually hack the leaderboard based on the matrix. If you are dealing with like segmentation, for example, and dice and Hasselhoff distance are the main matrix, you should consider when choosing the best validation checkpoint, both matrix, not only one, because by stopping criteria based on dice, you will find most of the models have a very small margin when it comes to dice, in contrast with the Hasselhoff, for example. So choosing the best validation checkpoint based on the challenge matrix will give you a big edge. The last thing is the challenge task, which is the main incentive also for participating in a challenge. I don't focus if I don't know the task, rather than if the task is clinically impactful and I can actually bring something to the table. For instance, if the task is simple as organ segmentation that people are achieving 90 plus dice, me bringing something to the table would be very difficult because the improvement would be larger margin. But if I go to a challenge that is actually challenging, and there is a huge variance in the results, like 60, 70, 80, then it means that my innovations and my progress will be seen. And these are basically the 3 ABCs that I use in to choose a challenge. And ironically, you didn't see the experience or if I have prior work in this challenge or not, because I actually had successful submissions without having any prior knowledge about the task, I would say.
Okay.
And going briefly to the second question, as far as I remember, the working with teams, or which one?
The submission process and the participation into a specific challenge. Could you just guide us through the steps that you took?
So definitely the submission process is relatively easier if the challenge organizers are sharing a baseline. So in April, which is this month, the call for challenges is going live. And then challenge organizers usually release the data end of April, early May. And then participants have May, June, and July to work on their methods and then submit for the validation phase. And then it can end up in the test phase and then the challenge day. So the process actually differs from one challenge to another. But what I have mentioned is actually the most common thing. And sometimes if you are on the top teams, you can be invited for an in-person presentation, also invited to present your paper in a workshop, as Professor Chenton mentioned. So I will be organizing a challenge this year, it will be my first challenge to organize. So following my challenge organization, I go with the simple pipeline that I mentioned, and I worked in the past 2 weeks to generate a baseline for people to be working with, so that it can be as easy as possible in the process to take the baseline and submit it, usually as Docker, because the first challenge in MICCAI that I took part of was a Docker submission. And even though if you don't have any experience with Docker, you just simply follow the guidelines and it will be very smooth submission. And that's it for the process.
Perfect. So the key points to remember is decide the challenge that you want to participate in, and the process is rather simple, especially if the baselines are already released. And once you are able to reproduce or recode the baseline, it becomes experience and expertise of people that you're working with. Would you also take us a bit through the decision mechanism on how to work as like take the challenge alone or work with several people? How do you decide to?
Yes, so actually most of the challenge that I took was part of a team. So 3 of them were actually worked jointly with a team of people. I suggest that if you are seeking for like teaming up, look for close collaboration like your colleagues in the master's, your colleagues in the PhD, and then you can push each other's. I remember that in 2022, I team up jointly with a brilliant student in my master, Kausar. I'm not sure if she's here. None of us had any experience with federated learning, and none of us had experience with the framework being used as a baseline. But through, like talking, we managed it. So reaching out for remote collaboration like professors, I would say is lovely for sure. It changed a lot of my challenge experience. However, I didn't have the strong profile 2 years ago to go to a professor with full confidence and say, okay, I want to participate in a challenge. Would you help to guide me? So if I'm going to suggest something, if you don't have a strong profile, I would rather say you go take the baseline and reproduce it and then have some results. And then you can go to ask the professor for remote collaboration, asking them that you have these results and you would like them to guide you through. Then they can actually see your incentives and motivation clear by having your hands-on practical experience rather than mentioning like an email by saying, okay, I want to work with you. You know what I mean?
That does make sense, and maybe we can extend this this question to the authorship as well. That while working on a paper, how do you decide that?
So when working with a paper, as I mentioned, like I had
It's a problem that you're working on, and there are several moving parts. Sorry, I guess I cut off a bit. Could you please repeat, Marwan?
So when working with a collaborator, like I don't think we think much about the authorship, rather than if we both work jointly for the challenge, then we will be like co-joint authorship in the challenge paper, like we are jointly like co-authorship in the paper. And if you work alone, definitely like you have the full authorship. And it matters on the process because you can decide on something at the very beginning and then finally you don't work at all. So you cannot claim first authorship if you want to challenge and you didn't put the same effort as the other collaborator, no?
Definitely. And towards the last part of this session, as well as the last question of the webinar, what was your most enjoyable moment when conducting research and preparing for this the submission for a challenge? And anything if you would like to suggest as a change to this challenge process, what would it be?
My most enjoyable moment, I would say, if I actually got the baseline working and I have the rank, even though if it's low, but I am there and then I can improve it. And the only thing that I would like to change is that make it obligatory for organizers to release the baseline and matrix. And also, I would like that the MICCAI challenges work closely with the MICCAI main conference, because as you all know, there is a lot of submissions coming on and there is a lot of papers that being accepted. But when you go to the practical life, when you go to challenges to reproduce this on your task, you might see a variance in the results between different methods. So sometimes the most simple methods like UNet win challenges rather than the state-of-the-art methods, I would say. So considering research and the state-of-the-art and novelty can come on one aspect, and optimizing your work and winning a challenge can come to another aspect, I would say. So I would really like to have some sort of collaboration between the main conference and the organizers, so that maybe the state-of-the-art can benchmark their methods on the challenge before submitting, you know what I mean? So this will actually give a very nice exposure, I would say.
Definitely, we'll try to communicate that to the persons concerned, and maybe you can incorporate that into account. And Vaina, if you can check if there are any questions in the chat.
Yeah, I think it's more like about the topics we talked in the previous section. Is it good thing to, if a method is simple, is simplicity preferred over complexity of methodology? Because we probably mentioned that, like simplicity, complexity kind of trade-off.
I guess what I mean, like, I'm not saying complex methods are bad. I guess I just mean that you don't have to make your method fancier than it is. The simple methods still are good, especially if they're powerful. But sometimes I find I go down on these tracks, and then when I go back to basic mathematics of PCA, or like that's what I used in my papers, it was just another application of principal component analysis that so many people have access to, but it works really well. That I don't think complexity is a bad thing, but I do think people want to understand your methods, people want to understand your paper. And so the more simple you can make it in your communication, the better it's going to go over.
I see. So the key point is make your communication message simpler, but your method can depend on that real problem. It's not like a binary thing, I guess. Yes, see, if the audience has any other question, feel free to type here, or you can open your mic to ask directly.
In the meantime, while if someone has a question they're typing, I would like to remind that that as mentioned in one of the slides, which we'll be sharing soon, we do have a workshop organization from the MICCAI Student Board itself. So please do participate, and we encourage submissions from everyone, especially the early career researchers, so that you can receive great feedback on your submission. And even though the work is not completely finished, it's a great initiative and a platform to share your work. So we would highly encourage you to participate in the workshop. And let's thank all our panelists for their valuable time and their insight that they have shared on all the important aspects of MICCAI, which is MICCAI main paper submissions, rebuttals, challenges, and workshop. It was a very enlightening session, I would say, for me, definitely, to learn quite a bit from the field experts. So I, along with would like to thank you all for your valuable time and insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
We'll wait for
Thank you.
another. We'll wait for another 30 seconds to see if audience have any questions, and if not, let's wrap up the session perfectly on time. Also, if the panelists have any last-minute thoughts they would like to share, you're most welcome, please.
No thoughts, but good luck everybody on this call that are going to do submissions in the future, participate in challenges. I'm rooting for you.
One thing to add is that I prepared some slides to summarize what I have said just during this panel discussion. So maybe I will just post it on Twitter or LinkedIn, just as a PowerPoints, if that's okay for you. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Chen, for that. That would definitely be very useful.
Good. Yeah, I will keep you posted.
Yeah, perfect. So I guess that's the end of the session. Thanks everyone, and thanks to all the attendees who spent their valuable time. I hope they get to learn a lot. And for the people who will be watching the recording, we will make this recording and the slides available to you so that you can take a look at this. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of the day or rest of the night.
Thank you. Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye. Have a nice weekend.